Hi, Russ of Aquarimax here. In part 2 of the Isopod Care Guide, we'll talk all about substrate and decor. Substrate is one of the most crucial aspects of isopod care. However, isopods can survive and even thrive on a wide variety of substrates. Let's begin by talking about the base layer, or lowest layer of substrate. When I first started keeping isopods, I used a compressed coconut husk fiber. It's also called coconut coir, cocoa peat, has lots of other names. And I used that as my base layer, and it worked quite well. My isopods grew and bred just fine. These compressed bricks are widely available at pet shops, garden stores, and online under several different brand names. I'll put a link in the description. The advantages of cocoa fiber are that it's readily available, you know exactly what you're getting, and since it's sold in these completely dry bricks, it tends to be free of pests. You can just soak it in water and then it softens and you can use it. However, one disadvantage of it is that it's not very nutritious. And I found that once I switched to more nutritious substrate, my isopods were considerably more productive. If you only have one isopod colony or maybe a few, it's not too expensive to use coconut fiber, but with all the colonies I have, I need a much cheaper option. For one of the cheapest possible options for substrate, some people simply collect soil from their own backyard. That can work, and sometimes very well. Composition of backyard soil can vary widely, so you may or may not be providing your isopods with a nutritious substrate. Garden soils high in composted plant matter are preferable. There may be the risk of toxins such as pesticides from backyard soil as well. Pesticides can, of course, be deadly to your isopods. Finally, with backyard soil, you never know quite what you're introducing into your isopod enclosure. You may never have issues with pests, but on the other hand, centipedes, mites, slugs, spiders, and more can all be introduced in this way. Some may be harmless. Others may compete for food with your isopods, and still others may attack your isopods directly. So it's free, but it's a little risky. My current preferred base substrate consists mainly of two products. One, organic compost, and two, oak pellets, which are sold for use in smoking meats. I'll put links in the description, but these are both likely to be a lot cheaper if you buy them locally. Organic compost can be derived from many items, and I try to source compost with as much hardwood leaf content as possible. I've used several different brands and formulations, all successfully. When I can't get compost, I have even used organic potting soil, but I do prefer the compost. Oak pellets, like these, need to be soaked in water, and once they're soaked, they quickly crumble into damp sawdust. This sawdust can be mixed directly into the organic compost, or even fermented to create flake soil, but flake soil is a topic for a future video. I use approximately 1 part compost, 1 part soaked oak pellets, or sometimes 2 parts compost to 1 part pellets. It's possible to leave the oak pellets out and just include some chunks of rotting wood for the isopods to gnaw on if you need to. And if you can't get oak pellets, the alder pellets work just fine too. There are probably other types of meat smoking pellets that work well as well. The substrate is fairly inexpensive and can be quite nutritious, so it works well for producing a lot of isopods. These days, there are also quite a few ready-made substrates that are suitable for isopods. Some are made specifically for vivariums in which isopods function as a cleanup crew. I have various enclosures in which isopods are thriving on such substrates, from AnyHerpeticulture.com and the BioDude. I'll put links in the description. Other ready-made substrates are intended specifically for isopods in isopod enclosures. I've used a few of these with good results as well, such as the formula by Lugarti and another by Permian Exotics. I'll put links in the description for those as well. So if you want to get something that doesn't take a work, you don't have to mix it yourself. It might be a little more pricey, but the work is done for you. So it's another option for you. Another crucial component of isopod substrate is the leaf litter layer. Isopods really chow down on decomposing fallen hardwood leaves, and they will generally thrive and breed much better if they have plenty. And the leaves also serve as hides. I have used magnolia, maple, cottonwood, sea grape, locust, pear, willow, plum, apple, pecan, and other leaves. It's nice to keep a generous layer of this on top of most of the rest of the base layer of the substrate and replace it as you see that the isopods are eating through them. A mix of leaves is usually better than just one type, And you do need to make sure that you collect the leaves from a place where pesticides are not being used. Because we don't spray our grass or our trees or anything like that, we are able to collect our leaves in our backyard. And it is important to collect them after they have fallen because they're going to be chemically and nutritionally different if they are pulled off the tree. Now, a key portion of the substrate is what I like to call the hydration station. And basically this is just a mossy patch, a moist area, whatever you want to call it. Sphagnum moss is a really good way to provide that, and so I make a small area of the enclosure one side where there is always moist sphagnum moss where the isopods can regulate their own moisture needs. I'll put a link in the description to the brand that I use, but you can find it in many places. Just make sure it's not contaminated with fertilizers or pesticides. Another crucial component of an isopod enclosure is the decor, and that generally equates to hides. Now, leaves can serve as a hide, and they do, but it's nice to have a piece of bark like this cork bark in the enclosure as well. Generally, the isopods will congregate in large numbers under there, indicating that there is a preference for an area like that, which makes finding your isopods and feeding your isopods quite a bit easier. You can also set food on top of these surfaces, and it helps prevent mold in the substrate. So hides are great for the isopods to feel secure, to be able to regulate your moisture needs, but also for you as a keeper to be able to see and feed them easily. Now, this video would not be complete if I did not mention springtails here. I know they're not really part of substrate and they're not really part of decor, but they are so crucial that I think I need to mention them in this video because you need to get them into your enclosure as soon as possible. Many isopod keepers swear by springtails because, one, they serve as a cleanup crew for isopods, tend to eat some of the things that isopods won't. They'll also tend to clean up mold more directly than isopods will. And they will also help outcompete pests like mites and fungus gnats. So it's really good to get springtails into your enclosure as soon as possible. And we'll talk a little bit more about that soon. For the next segment of the video, I want to show you step by step as I add each component of the substrate and decor and the springtails and discuss a little bit more about each one. Before we do that, I want to give a quick shout out to our supporters at Patreon. I'm excited to announce we have 40 patrons now, and that's really exciting for me because that helps me do more of what I love, which is making educational videos for you and everyone. So if you're interested in finding out more about that, I'll put a link at the end of this video. And now onto the step-by-step build of an isopod enclosure. All right, so the first thing we're going to do is put that base layer in. And this can vary in depth. Some people go as shallow as about 1/4 of an inch. Many people go about 1 inch to 2 inches. And that's about where I'm going. Somewhere between 1 inch and 2 inches of this base layer, which is again the organic compost, and then some of these soaked oak pellets. And the proportions are not totally exact. I think I'm being a little bit stingy with the oak pellets this time. But isopods are not called wood lice for nothing. They need wood to some extent, or at least they do better when they have it available to them. All right, so next we're going to put some leaf litter. And some of these leaves should be crushed. You want to provide a lot of surface area for them to get to. Some of these leaves are going to be whole, some of them are going to be crushed, it's going to be mixed up. It's important if you have the leaf stems in there to make sure that they're not leaning up against the side. You can inadvertently provide a ladder, and you don't want to do that. They can climb right out. It will prop the lid open a little bit and give them a little gap where they can get out. So make sure those are not doing anything like that, and they're not going up to any ventilation holes either, anything like that. So something like that should be sufficient to start out with. And then next we're going to make the hydration station with the sphagnum moss. So get some moist sphagnum moss and put that in there. And notice that's probably something like 1/4 or 1/5 of the surface area is covered in this this moss. You can get away without using this moss, but when I saw that Wally at Supreme Gecko was using this for his isopods, I realized how much easier it is to keep your isopods, allow them to have a moisture gradient when you use this, because it stays moist for a long time and allows the rest of it to stay drier. Really good way to make it work, and I've noticed an improvement in the ease of husbandry of my isopods, and I think they just do better with that. So I try to keep that in there, and you can moisten it when the time comes just by wetting down the sides of the enclosure right up against the moss. Okay. And then finally, I'm going to add a couple of hides. A lot of different things will work. You can use bark of various types. You can use magnolia leaves. You can even use cardboard. But cork bark is one of my favorite things to use. And probably the main reason is that cork bark takes a long time for the isopods to eat. They will chew at it and it will eventually kind of disappear, but it does take a long time for that to happen in general. And I like to situate the hides, and it depends on which type of isopods you have, whether or not you want a really concave piece or a flatter piece. Some of the ones that like drier areas will like more of a concave piece, even more than this, like a cork round cork tube cut in half. So that's really kind of a really concave surface, but this is fine for most isopods. And it's nice to situate one partly into the hydration station with the moss, and then maybe one a little further away so that they, once again, they can find the moisture level that they need at the moment. So this enclosure is almost ready for isopods. So in order to seed a colony of isopods with springtails, I do one of two things. Sometimes I just get my pure culture of springtails and add some of those. I culture them on charcoal. But something I'll often do too is I'll just grab a chunk of moss from another culture, try to make reasonably sure that there aren't any young isopods stowing away in there, because I don't want to, start another culture of isopods on the right. This is for a new species, and put them in here. I would not do this if this were a culture of isopods that can be pests like, powder blues or dwarf whites that can infest another culture of isopods. So I only do it with isopods that aren't going to cause that problem. And there are enough springtails in that little handful of moss that it gets the culture going really well. And there you have it. The enclosure is ready for some new isopods. In the next installment of the Isopod Care Guide, we'll talk about getting new isopods and that break-in period that can be a little bit challenging for some new isopod owners. Thanks for watching today. I post videos all about aquarium and vivarium pets, especially isopods. Please feel free to share, rate, comment, and if you haven't already,
subscribe.
And then click the bell icon so you don't miss my next video.